Imagine an army so powerful that it wins wars without ever marching onto a battlefield. A force so invisible that emperors, kings, and generals check the shadows of their own palaces, terrified of what might be waiting for them. That force was the Hashashin, the original assassins. And far from being just a myth from movies or video games, they were deliberately crafted into the most feared, highly effective secret society in human history. They toppled rulers, paralyzed massive empires, shifted the balance of global power, and quietly rewrote the rules of war. And yet, ask most people who the assassins actually were, who designed their brotherhood, and why their tactics still echo in the modern world, and they couldn't tell you. The story of the assassins is not just medieval history, it is the story of asymmetric warfare, psychology, and power itself. War in its simplest form is a numbers game. You build a bigger army, you crush your enemy. But in the late 11th century, a brilliant and ruthless Persian scholar named Hashashin realized something profound. Fighting a massive empire head-on was suicide. He didn't have tens of thousands of soldiers. He didn't have endless wealth. What he had was a deep understanding of human psychology. He knew that an empire is a machine, and if you remove the men pulling the levers, the machine grinds to a halt. Hassan took control of a supposedly impenetrable mountain fortress called Alamut, the Eagle's Nest, located in modern-day Iran. From this isolated rock, he looked down at the mighty Seljuk Empire, a superpower of the day, and decided he wasn't going to fight their armies. He was going to hunt their leaders. He created a localized, heavily fortified state that didn't rely on holding vast territories. Instead, he relied on projecting absolute terror. Fast forward through centuries of military history, and you'll see how Hashashin didn't just invent a cult, he weaponized fear itself. The real transformation came with the assassins' methods. When the Hashashin marked a target, they didn't send an army, they sent a fidai, a single, highly trained agent willing to sacrifice his own life for the mission. These agents would spend months, sometimes years, embedding themselves into the lives of their targets. They would learn new languages, adopt new religions, and become trusted servants, guards, or advisors to the very men they were sent to kill. And then, when the target felt safest, the strike would happen. But it wasn't done quietly in the dark. The genius of the assassins was theatricality. They struck in broad daylight. In crowded markets. During Friday prayers inside the holiest mosques. Suddenly, a ruler's power was no longer measured by the size of his army or the thickness of his castle walls. He could be touched anywhere, at any time. The message was blindingly clear: no one is untouchable. The psychological shift was massive. Fear seeped into every layer of political life. Viziers wore chainmail under their robes. Sultans refused to leave their chambers. Paranoia paralyzed the elite. The assassins didn't need to defeat an empire's military. They just needed to make the empire's leaders too terrified to give orders. But to make this work, Hashashin needed agents whose loyalty was absolute. Western myths, famously spread by Marco Polo, claim the assassins were drugged with hashish, which is where the word assassin supposedly comes from, and tricked into believing they were visiting a literal paradise to guarantee their obedience. But the reality is far more chilling. They didn't need drugs. They were fueled by intense religious devotion, rigorous intellectual training, and an unbreakable belief in their cause. They were educated killers. The entire architecture of their training was constructed to normalize self-sacrifice as the ultimate honor. And here is the hidden genius of it all: an enemy who does not fear death cannot be threatened. When your opponent is willing to die to kill you, traditional deterrence vanishes. By the 12th century, the assassins weren't just a nuisance, they were the ultimate geopolitical power brokers. From their network of mountain fortresses across Persia and Syria, they played superpowers against each other. When the legendary Muslim commander Saladin, the man who would famously retake Jerusalem, tried to crush the assassins, he woke up one morning in his heavily guarded tent to find a poisoned dagger pinned to a note beside his bed. The message was simple: "We are right here. We can end you whenever we choose." Saladin, the conqueror of empires, quietly packed up his camp, marched his army away, and struck a truce with the assassins. This was the perfect loop of their business model. The more leaders they eliminated, the more their legend grew. The more their legend grew, the less they actually had to kill. Often, just the threat of an assassin was enough to force kings to pay massive tributes and change their foreign policies. They were an autonomous state funded by extortion and guaranteed by the blade. The danger, of course, was that this system relied entirely on the fear of their enemies. For nearly 200 years, the assassins held the Middle East in a state of terror. But in the 13th century, they made a fatal miscalculation. They tried to intimidate the Mongols. When Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, marched his terrifying Mongol horde into the region, he didn't care about the assassins' psychological warfare. The Mongols didn't play political chess, they flipped the board. In 1256, the Mongols surrounded Alamut. The impenetrable fortress was breached, their grand library was burned to ashes, and the centralized power of the Hashashin was permanently broken. But while the physical castles fell, the idea survived. The assassins proved that absolute devotion and calculated terror could bring the mightiest empires to their knees. They discovered that a small group of determined individuals could short-circuit the traditional rules of power. This process, using targeted fear to achieve political leverage, became the blueprint for asymmetric warfare. The real assassins didn't just kill people, they manufactured panic. They expanded the boundaries of psychological warfare, and they proved that power does not reside in armies or gold. Power resides in the mind. So what is the lesson here? It is that warfare is not always fought on a battlefield. It is that the greatest threats to power are often the ones you cannot see until it is entirely too late. To understand the assassins is to understand that the ultimate weapon isn't a sword, a gun, or a bomb. The ultimate weapon is an idea backed by unyielding resolve. History doesn't repeat, but the pattern is always there. From the shadow of the Alamut Mountains to the modern world of asymmetric conflict, the story is the same. The few can always manipulate the many if they are willing to pay the price. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. The past left a trail. I'll show you where it leads.